Good evening, 9 o'clock on the east coast of Australia. It is, as we speak, when the sun starts to rise in Washington, D.C., when we will start to hear again from the President of the United States, who has had plenty to say on his social media platforms, as well as a lot of action which is happening in and around the Middle East, where it is 2 o'clock right now in Israel, where bombs from Iran have been landing. Despite the Iron Dome, some have made it through. Some of the explosions pretty significant. Thankfully, as we discussed last night on the program, adequate warning means most people end up in a bomb shelter. Let's focus on Iran, though, because there is a fair bit happening there right now. In fact, in the past hour, there has been major operations, and I'll tell you some of the targets that have been hit. The local time there is 1:30 in the afternoon. We've also got an idea of what is happening in Europe with the bosses of the International Atomic Energy Authority. Those people, on the behalf of the United Nations, have actually got some indication about what damage has been done in the past couple of days. We'll get to that in a moment or two's time. And the Iranians are meeting in Moscow, hoping for some help from Vladimir Putin. A former Russian Prime Minister and Russian President has actually had plenty to say on top of what might come out of that conversation. So let me bring you up to date. A lot has happened even in the past couple of hours. Now, put simply, the reason I tell you all of those times is prime time on Sky News, and certainly towards this time of prime time is when you're going to start to hear stuff out of the United States. We seem to be right at the height of when things happen during the daytime in the Middle East. And as I said, you can start to look your way around the globe. So regardless of what you may hear in the morning, which will be a form of an update, if you are interested in following every little move of this thing, make sure you're checking in with Sky News Primetime again at the top of each show for the next few days. I'll try to tell you what has happened in the past couple of hours, not just react to what has happened in the past 24 hours. Okay, so let's get on with this. So as we speak, the United Nations and via their weapons inspectors are now starting to give us a little bit of an insight into how much damage was done by the American hit on Iran. Now, you know, the past 24, 36 hours, there's been great claims made by the President of the United States and military officials that of the 3 different sites that they hit, there has been significant damage done to the Iranian nuclear operation. The Iranians said that because they feared that things were coming, some of these sites may well have been emptied out. So there's a lot of bluster, there's a lot of BS, there's a lot of sizzle, but there's also a lot of stake when it comes to this story. So again, I'll try to explain things and try to keep an eye on lots of moving parts here. So let's have a look here at the announcement which was made by the essentially United Nations and their weapons inspectors. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to play this for you because the 3 main sites, including, of course, the one that was underground and the 2 other sites, all hit within that extraordinary hour or so in the middle of the night, about between 2 and 3 a.m. local time in Iran. Well, remember, we had to wait a couple of days to find out what the battle damage assessments were going to be. The Americans are expected to give us another insight into that perhaps as early as the next couple of hours, but in a midpoint between the early announcements, the bluster that may well have come out of America about how decisive this is, well, what is actually happening, and is there any fallout? Because obviously if you're hitting enriched uranium, the possibility for poisons to make it into the air and winds to move it around local populations becomes an issue. But here's literally fresh off the press what's just been said by the UN.
At this time, no one, including the IEA, is in a position to have fully assessed the underground damage at Fordow. Given the explosive payload utilized and the extreme vibration-sensitive nature of centrifuges, very significant damage is expected to have occurred. At the Isfahan nuclear site, additional buildings were hit, with the US confirming their use of cruise missiles. Affected buildings include some related to the uranium conversion process. Also, at this site, entrances to tunnels used for the storage of enriched material appear to have been hit. At the Natanz enrichment site, the fuel enrichment plant was hit, with the US confirming that it used ground-penetrating munitions.
So at this stage, there seems to be significant damage. Remember, the president was saying that it was a bullseye here, total annihilation. The Iranians have said, yes, thanks for the effort, there is some damage, but we may well have other facilities in other places. Again, where the truth lies, it does take a couple of days to get there. And the reason we didn't show you last night, and I've held off showing you some of those satellite images, was because they simply weren't detailed enough. And again, I know there's a lot on social media, I know there's a lot on clickbait media, but we do our best to verify as much as possible to pull it all together for you at the end of the night, which we'll be doing for the next couple of days. Now, also, in the past hour, the Israeli Defence Forces have announced that they are stepping up the war against Iran, and they are now starting to move from the military targets to the regime targets. The regime targets, put simply, are the government. The capacity for the Iranian government to stay in place. The Israeli Defence Forces in the last hour have put out a statement saying that they have struck 6 regime airports across western, central and eastern Iran. They've hit runways, underground hangars, refuelling aircraft, as well as a series of jets. The destroyed aircraft were meant to stop the IAF jets, put simply, again, trying to push back against Israeli, United States, any other jets that may well be moving into the area. The IAF impaired takeoff capabilities from these airports, as well as the Iranian military's ability to operate its air force from them. So remember, part of how we've got where we've got in the past week is because the ability of Iran to launch anything but a missile has been deeply knocked back. An idea of some of the places that have been hit. As you can see, multiple towards the west of the country or the left of your screen. We know around Tehran, but there's a little more detail about one of the things they've hit in the past hour, as well as the centre of the country, and then, of course, to the east or the right-hand side of your screen. Now, traditionally, the further to the left of your screen, the closer things are to Israel. Obviously, the further away, the closer we start to get into other countries, including countries like Pakistan, which do share much and some of the border here. One of the things that has been hit in the past hour is a prison. I understand that the prison is in central Tehran. Now, the plan was not to level the prison, to kill the prisoners. Instead, the Israeli Defence Forces have released some footage in the past couple of minutes. We'll turn that around for you when we can. But what they've done is they've blown the doors off the prison, because the prison is apparently where many political prisoners, i.e. enemies of the regime, would be in place. Great work from our team, have turned that around very quickly. Again, you can see the doors of a notorious prison where political prisoners are being held has been blown off by the Israelis. The Israelis, who for the past week have been focused on military targets, are now starting to move towards what they refer to as regime targets. Now, they are actively trying to weaken the Iranian government, the Iranian regime. They want a change in who is governing that country because of its obvious threat that has taken place over decades towards Israel. The United States has said that they are not involved in the regime change like they were in Afghanistan with the Taliban, like they were with Saddam Hussein in Iraq, because the process of regime change, because it's not just about killing the leaders, it's the next level who want to be the leaders, or the, after decades, many layers that exist that have been keeping the Iranian population down for decades. That process is one that is going to take years. It's one that the Israelis have said that they are committed to doing, and we now start to see the beginning of the harder pivot towards that. All of that, putting the pressure on the Iranian government, the theory being that more pressure on the Iranian government, the reduction in their ability to control their people means, if the people want to, there's an opportunity for a revolution to remove those people. Now, a former royal family from decades ago that had ruled does have members of its family across Europe. One of them is expected to speak in the next little while. I wouldn't imagine Iran is planning to go back to a monarchy anytime soon, but there are other voices with different alternatives as opposed to the people who are running Iran as we speak. But what a couple of hours it has been, continues to be, and literally every time we hit refresh on all of our sources here, there's more information to tell you. So, of course, we will pass all of that on to you as we go. How Iran reacts is a key question. It is, frankly, the key question. Because, as we've spoken about before, there's an awful lot of American troops, particularly in places like Kuwait, which are literally just the other side of a very small waterway from Iran. The weapons that can travel all the way to Israel are not required. Obviously, you need far less intense in terms of ballistic missiles to be able to travel significant distances. But any attack on US troops, well, that is the beginning of something very, very significant. The expectation is, and the warnings from the United States is, if you do one thing to one soldier, then you are going to pay a much bigger price than you currently have. So there's all sorts of conversation about what they may well get involved with. Here's some of the potential conversations about how Iran could respond, not just going after American installations, but potentially everything to do from world trade to some terrible things which could involve terrorism.
They can go after US embassies and military outposts in the Middle East. They can try to go after oil installations throughout the Persian Gulf, block major trade routes like the Strait of Hormuz. They could try to rain down more missiles on top of Israel. The problem they have is that many of these options are like the tactical equivalent of a suicide bombing. They can do a lot of damage to their adversaries, but they may not survive that blowback.
And also about the timing. Now, we know that there was some speculation that the amount of enriched uranium was a key factor in when the United States decided to get involved as it has. Also, the scaling up that Israel has been involved with for the past couple of weeks, also the timing of these things. Well, as you know, Donald Trump left the G7 meeting on day one of what was supposed to be a two-day meeting, and we're learning via American media tonight that there was a threat which Iran had made to the United States, which meant that was the reason the president left and started to move in the direction that ultimately resulted in Operation Midnight Hammer.
Just in, that Iran directly threatened America?
Tom, tonight NBC News has learned that message from Iran was conveyed to President Trump by an intermediary during last week's G7 summit, warning the president if he launched airstrikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran could respond by unleashing terrorist attacks on the U.S. by activating sleeper cells it has inside this country, according to U.S. officials, all as we learn new details about those historic strikes.
So pretty extraordinary here that Iran openly saying that they would, and we know that they have got many a proxy, many a connection to Al-Qaeda, to the Houthis, to a whole collection of other groups, that they may well have infiltrated the United States recently or over a long period of time, and an attack on the homeland in the United States. Of course, the first significant attack since what happened in Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C. and in New York back on 9/11, 2001, the best part of now 25 years ago. Well, that was seemingly the key moment when things certainly turned against Iran from the United States, and the United States took the action that it did. Now, amazingly, there are people who are getting a pretty reasonable run in the Australian media who are trying to play Orange Man bad, Orange Man criminal, Orange Man brings us to the brink of World War III, not paying any attention whatsoever that the person that metaphorically, the nation they were sitting opposite on the table, were threatening terrorist attacks inside the United States. The one that is threatening to close down a third of the world's oil that moves by ship. One that still has always wanted a nuclear bomb in order to blow another country off the face of the map. Again, you can have a whole series of opinions about a whole series of things that have taken place over the past couple of years or many decades. But unbelievably, Jeffrey Robertson, of course, the left-wing lawyer, writing, I believe, from the United Kingdom, but who knows, wrote today that Trump's rap sheet is so long, but this may be his worst crime. Now, again, I have my misgivings about how deep things have gone, particularly in places like Gaza, about what proportionality has been. But as I've said, you have to be able to see the multiple parts of all of this and to actually have a look at the scenario of why America got involved to do what they did to a country that threatened them directly. Well, pretty obvious to me why the president had to act. But Orange Man bad, all the rest of it here, well, of course, ludicrous. But the bit that's really worth talking about tonight and taking a couple of minutes to understand here is you would have thought by now, and those of us that have taken a cursory interest in the Middle East, again, I do not pretend to be a Middle East expert. I, like you, am somebody who has just heard and seen the stories and seen many things over many decades. All right? We're going to try to talk to lots of people, lots of different perspectives. We know that there are diaspora of many, many countries that are in this country. We know that there are Lebanese, both Christian and Muslim people that are here who care about what has happened in a country that their family may well have been from. The same with Palestine. The same with the West Bank. The same, which of course is part of, as well as what's been taking place and the Israeli and Jewish community here, as well as there is an Iranian diaspora in Australia. In fact, on the North Shore of Sydney is one of the strongest of the Iranian communities here. And again, for those that are half listening, and I just need to say this because there are bad actors who will try to misinterpret news coverage, and when we discuss these things, that nobody is talking about the citizens of any of these countries. It is about the governments of these countries, which brings us now to the fact that many of us have thought that if something like this had happened, that say Iran and Israel started to tension things up, then presumably it triggers another country, another country, another country, and there are more in the Arab nations that clearly have antagonistic, if not outright hostile opinions of Israel, and that we would be a lot further down a pretty difficult track, frankly, that more war will have been broken out. But for a lot of different reasons, Iran may well have some verbal support from some of its neighbours, but it's not getting any military support. So it is fascinating to see that the country that they have run off to is one that they signed a defence pact with only in January of this year, and that is Russia. The foreign minister who was speaking last night, giving the first major public response from Iran, well, has now appeared in front of officials in Russia. Iran has little choice but to retaliate against the US as Russia faces an urgent decision now about how to back Tehran. Now, unlike a scenario, so say, like the ANZUS Treaty, that if someone attacks America, Australia goes to help, and if someone attacks Australia, America comes to help. That's a written deal. The deal between Iran and Russia is a little looser. It's to supply weapons, it's to supply some form of intelligence, but it is not. If one of those nations is hit, then the other one automatically joins them and go to war against whoever attacked them. Instead, there is this ability for them to run and go and talk to the Russian officials. Now, we are getting a little bit of tape out of the meeting. Cameras have been booted in the past half an hour or so. But of the introductory comments that you often see between the leaders, we have no translation about the Russian side of things. But this is what the Iranians were saying to the people who they hope will come and help them. And when I tell you about some of the help that might be on offer, this is a very, very important meeting happening as we speak in Russia.
We always had a close contact in terms of exchanging our opinion and advice with each other.
Also worth noting here is that Dmitry Medvedev, who was, after the first run of Vladimir Putin as president, moved from essentially swapped and became the president of Russia very briefly, while Putin became the prime minister. He still is in and around the upper echelons of the Russian government. And I hope you're sitting down, because he has said that countries are now ready to supply Iran with nuclear weapons. So if the entire point of the past couple of days has been about putting Iran on the back foot, forcing them back towards their line in terms of coming up with their own weapons, a high-ranking Russian official, as the Iranians are sitting down with the Russians, is openly talking publicly, releasing statements on social media in his own language, on his own account, and are believed to be verified by international news organisations that don't worry about waiting to build a bomb, we'll give you one. Now, if the idea here is that that automatically means that as soon as you have one of these things, then whoever is currently trying to knock over your government, like Israel with the prisons, the military targets and the airports, but presumably the threat of the nuclear bomb would mean that stops. But of course, if there's any chance of one being transferred into the country, well, we would imagine that any attempt in that transportation would be stopped, at the very least by the Israeli, but most likely by the Americans. If that's a Russian bomb, then you understand how the stakes of this can get very quickly out of control. Now, again, the reason I'm using lots of words, lots of caveats, trying to say where things actually are, is not about where they might go, but just what people have said to this point, okay? As for what that Russian ally had said, the former Russian president, can we put the, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, so he's still an active player, said on Sunday that President Donald Trump had pushed the US into another war and that countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. Medvedev made the remarks on Telegram outlining his views on what the Trump administration strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities would lead to moving forward. Again, the enrichment of nuclear material, and now we can say it outright, the future production of nuclear weapons will continue. So firstly, he is confirming that what the Iranians were always doing was building a bomb. Secondly, he goes on to say here that a number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads, meaning you won't have to build them, you won't have to enrich the uranium, they will give them to Iran. Now, as for Donald Trump, again, it is about 22 minutes past 7 o'clock in the morning. We know that Trump likes to get up early. We're keeping an eye on his social media feeds. If he says something, we'll give you a readout of that in a second. Of what I'm able to see about what has been released by the White House in the past, just before we came on air, about 25 minutes ago, is that the only public meetings is there might be something inside the Oval Office within the next couple of hours, but the only definite thing that is on his schedule is a 1 p.m. Washington time. So, again, many hours from now, in the middle of our night, you'll hear the update in the morning, but that is going to be with the national security team. Now, we understand there is media that has been assigned and standing by to go into the Oval Office if anything is to be said. Otherwise, we all wait and see what happens. Till then, the Israeli strikes, they happen, and they are happening now further to the west in Iran, where, among other things, that prison has been attacked, meaning political prisoners are now free. They are going after much of the government infrastructure. And on top of that, Iran is trying to throw something back the way of Israel. Which brings us to little old Australia. And the performance of the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, which was ridiculous today in Canberra. Now, firstly, I couldn't believe I woke up to a headline this morning that said, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese convenes National Security Committee 24 hours after the strike on Iran. Now, remember, this is not our war, was the initial position. I don't disagree with that position, but still, they've done everything they can to go nowhere near any sort of approval whatsoever of the United States president or what the United States has done. But they were forced into it because, as I said, you can have a view about the north of Israel, what's happening in Israel, what's happening to the south. You can have a view about America and its foreign policy over decades and decades. You can have a view about Iran, about Russia, its connections. But this is complicated and there can be many feelings and many opinions at many times. But for me, it's a slam dunk and it's obvious. They were building a bomb, as Russia has now confirmed, building a bomb with the express purpose of wiping Israel and its citizens off the map. America had the technology to stop it, so they did. It's exactly what they should have done, and it would have been pretty obvious that by this time last night, we should have been talking about a clear statement of support from the Australian Prime Minister, but no, We've got to check. We've got to check. If I mildly say anything okay, will the freshly re-elected 90-plus member leader of the Labor Party get himself into some sort of rhetorical trouble? I don't know why, but this took way too long and in many ways is too little too late because, of course, within half a nanosecond of yes, we agree they did the right thing, the world is a safer place, we're straight away back to the talk of can everyone just step back and take a step down.
The world has long agreed that Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon, and we support action to prevent that, and that is what this is.
Again, that de-escalation, that's the message from our Foreign Minister. This was after a meeting, 24 hours after we had heard that the bomb had dropped on Iran.
We do not want to see escalation. We do call for diplomacy, de-escalation and dialogue because the world does not want to see a full-scale war in the Middle East.
And a rare moment where the Canberra Press Gallery was not going to let the Prime Minister just go from one to one to change the subject. They had one question and many times over. Australia is, through AUKUS, in a partnership of not just military technology but intelligence with the United States, the United Kingdom. Also, the Five Eyes, the Quad. We are very much part of the circle of nations that do share information. So were we told before the bomb dropped?
PM Starmer noted that his government was given prior warning of the US action in Iran, I think quite shortly before it took place, but he was given warning. Was ours?
Was your government briefed prior to the attack? PM,
you weren't briefed? Is that the...
This was unilateral.
Now, he just would not answer the question. So eventually, this is the Prime Minister of Australia took 24 hours to come out, to have a meeting, and then again 24 hours and many hours on from when he should have had a response. This is what happened when he wouldn't or couldn't answer a question.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
All right, let's take a quick break because we will be discussing the Australian part of this while keeping an eye on everything that is taking place as we speak. A meeting in Moscow, bombs falling in Iran, bombs falling in Israel, and a president who you know does not want to go quietly off a scene, which he believes is a defining one of his presidency.